Okay, so today we're diving into something uh, pretty interesting. We're talking museums,
Museums, yeah.
but not just like, walking around looking at old stuff.
Right.
We're talking about what if museums could help us tackle big problems like climate change.
Yeah.
We're going deep on a study called Inside-Outside Impacts Model, Museums Planning for Cultural Impacts.
It's a fascinating study.
Yeah, get ready for some aha moments, right?
Yeah.
About the future of museums.
Yeah, you're in for a ride. This research really kind of flips the script on what we think museums can be.
Okay.
It's not just about dusty relics anymore. It's about them becoming like catalysts for a cultural transformation.
Catalyst, so they like speed up change?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but how?
So think of it this way. Traditional museums are kind of like time capsules. Right, they're preserving the past.
Yeah.
But eco-museums, which are a type highlighted in the study, are about shaping the future.
Okay.
They connect communities to their local environment and then hopefully inspire action from that.
So instead of just looking at how things were, it's how we can make things better.
Exactly. And this research actually argues that our current systems, economic, political, social, are unsustainable. They're pushing us toward a breaking point.
Right.
And eco-museums, they say, can help us see the bigger picture, connect the dots between, like, our actions and their impact.
So they're saying that museums could actually be drivers for a more sustainable future.
That's the core idea, yeah.
Right
That
on.
they can help shift our collective mindset, influence how we act, and even how we interact with the world around us.
That's a pretty big claim.
That is a big claim.
I'm starting to see museums in a whole new light.
Yeah.
But how does this actually work?
Right.
Like, are we all supposed to become museum curators now and go out and save the world?
Not quite.
Okay.
But this research really emphasizes that eco-museums, they're really good at connecting us to stories, sparking curiosity,
Right.
and encouraging us to see the world through different lenses.
Right.
They help us ask those tough questions like, what kind of future are we creating? And what role do I want to play in that?
Okay, so they get the conversation going.
Yeah.
They get us thinking, but then what?
Right.
How do we move from just like pondering in a museum to actually making a difference in the real world?
Right.
That's what I'm really curious about.
That's where this inside-outside model comes in.
Okay.
And that's what we'll unpack in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, now you got me hooked. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of this inside-outside model. What's the gist? Okay, so this inside-outside model,
Yeah.
it's the key
It's the key, yeah?
to like unlocking the change-maker potential
All right.
of museums.
Yeah.
That's a bold claim.
It is a bold claim.
What is it?
So think of it as like a blueprint for action.
Okay.
It's all about how museums can leverage all of their internal strengths, their staff, their collections, all the research they do to create real tangible impacts outside of just those museum walls.
So it's not just about what happens inside the museum,
Right.
but it's using what they do inside to spark change
Exactly.
in the wider world.
Exactly. And the study actually points to the Parabiago Eco Museum in Italy as like a prime example of this.
Yeah.
They were dealing with like a lot of environmental degradation. And instead of just, creating exhibits about it, they decided to take action.
I love that. Get those museums out of the ivory tower
I know, right?
into the thick of things.
Exactly.
But what did they do?
So
How do you go from museum exhibits
Yeah.
to like hands-on environmental action?
They got really creative. They actually partnered with local farmers to implement more sustainable practices. They created these awesome community maps that highlighted the local heritage.
Okay.
And get this, they even spearheaded a project that promoted locally sourced bread.
Hold on, bread.
Bread.
That was their big move.
It might sound insignificant,
Okay.
but it's actually really ingenious when you think about it. Like, bread making was already a central part of this community's identity, right?
Wow.
So they used that. They used bread as a lens to explore broader issues of sustainability, local economies, even climate change.
Wow. Talk about thinking outside the bread box.
Right.
But that makes sense. Start with something familiar,
Yeah,
something people care about,
totally.
and then use it to like
Right.
spark a bigger conversation.
Absolutely. And that's a key takeaway from this research is if museums want to be these agents of change, they need to connect with people on a personal and an emotional level.
Totally. Because facts and figures alone, they're just not enough to like really move people to action, you know?
Yeah.
You got to like grab their hearts, not just their minds.
Exactly, you got it.
Right.
And that's why this model stresses the importance of co-creation, like museums partnering with communities, partnering with other organizations to like find solutions together.
So it's about breaking down those walls
Yes.
between the museum
Totally.
and the outside world.
100%. Yeah.
No more ivory towers.
No more ivory towers.
Right.
Yeah.
So imagine like going to a museum exhibit that doesn't just tell you about climate change,
Right.
but it actually like empowers you to take action
Yeah.
in your own community.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a powerful idea.
I'd love to see museums like hosting workshops, designing exhibits that are really interactive, that like spark brainstorming sessions,
Right.
even partnering with visitors to collect data for citizen science projects.
Right, like why not?
Yeah.
Museums can totally become these hubs for community engagement, right? Places where people come and they feel empowered to be a part of the solution, not
Like
just...
that's spectators.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm getting fired up over here.
I know, right?
This is all sounding incredible.
Yeah.
But it does make me wonder,
Well, what's that?
how do we even begin to measure the impact of these efforts?
That's such a crucial question, and it's actually something this research really grapples with as well, because it's not enough to just count how many people walk through the door or, how many loaves of locally sourced bread they sell at the museum cafe.
Right.
We need to understand how these experiences are actually changing people's mindsets and their behaviors long term.
So it's about measuring impact, not just output.
Exactly.
But how do you measure something as intangible as like a shift in perspective?
It's definitely a challenge. But there are tools and strategies that are emerging. For example, museums can, track changes in visitor attitudes and behaviors. They can try to measure like the ripple effects of their programs within the community. And they can even collaborate with, social scientists to conduct in-depth impact assessments.
So it's about looking beyond just those museum walls
Yeah.
and seeing how these initiatives are actually impacting the bigger picture.
Precisely. And I think it's important to acknowledge, too, that real change like this takes time.
It always does.
It does. And it
Right.
requires this ongoing evaluation, adaptation. You try something. If it doesn't work, you got to be willing to go back to the drawing board.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly.
You got to be patient, persistent,
Yeah.
willing to learn and adapt as we go.
100%. And speaking of the long game, there's another really important aspect I think we need to touch on here.
Okay, let's do it.
And that's the need for museums to kind of take a look inward and acknowledge and address their own internal legacies.
Right, let's
No.
talk about that, because you can't be a champion for a better future
Right.
without taking a hard look at your own past.
Exactly.
It's like they say, right, you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools.
Ooh, I like that.
And museums,
Yeah.
they're often products of the same systems that they're trying to change.
That's a really good point. And this research actually, they emphasize that many museums, especially those with these like long histories,
Right.
they were born out of colonialism. And that legacy, it's often reflected in their collections, in the narratives they tell, even their organizational structures.
So before museums can really become these like agents of change, they need to kind of take a hard look in the mirror,
Yeah.
address some of those like deep-seated issues.
Absolutely. And this research, they actually call for museums to engage in this kind of ongoing critical reflection,
Okay.
acknowledging past harms and then actively working to decolonize their practices, their perspectives, everything.
So what does that actually look like in practice?
So it can involve things like repatriating artifacts back to their rightful owners, right? Reevaluating how they're telling stories, especially for marginalized communities, and ensuring that their staff, their board, like everyone involved actually reflects the diversity of the communities that they're serving.
So it's about more than just like showcasing diverse cultures.
Yeah.
It's about making sure those voices are actually represented
At every level.
at every level.
Yes, exactly.
At the institution.
100%. It's about moving beyond just like acknowledging those past wrongs
Right.
and actually working towards a more equitable and inclusive future, both within the museum walls and in the wider world.
Yeah, and it's about recognizing that all these big issues that we're facing, like the climate crisis,
Yeah.
social injustice, inequality,
They're all connected.
they're all connected. You can't solve one without addressing the others.
Exactly. And I think that's why this research is so compelling, because it's arguing that museums, with this kind of unique power they have to connect us to stories, to ignite our curiosity, to get us talking to each other, they could play this really pivotal role in helping us navigate all the complexities of the 21st century, right?
It's a lot.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
They can be catalysts for a more sustainable and just world, but it requires, like we were saying, this really deep and ongoing commitment to self-reflection and change.
It's a really powerful vision.
It is.
It's inspiring to think about the possibilities.
Yeah.
So I guess as we're wrapping up this deep dive here,
Yeah.
what's like the key takeaway that you hope our listeners are going to walk away with?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that museums, they have the potential to be so much more than we often give them credit for.
I think so too.
They're not just these repositories for the past. They can be these vibrant hubs of community engagement. They can be these catalysts for positive change, really powerful allies in our efforts to try to build a better future.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that we shouldn't underestimate the power of museums
Right.
to inspire us, to challenge us, to empower us to make a difference.
And the next time you find yourself in a museum, take a moment, right?
Yeah.
And just appreciate not just the cool exhibits and the artifacts, but the potential that they hold to actually help shape our world
Yeah.
for the better.
Ask yourself, how can this museum inspire me to make a difference?
Right, because
Yeah.
like we've been talking about today, the future isn't something that just happens to us.
We make it.
We create it together.
Yeah. And who knows, maybe museums will be leading the way.
Maybe so.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.